Welcome back. I'm Jim Mundy, and this is Jim Out Loud. Today we continue our series, The 12 Days of Cyber. This educational series explores cybersecurity from very basic principles and best practices through various processes and technical discussions, and ends with you, the viewer, having a good base knowledge of cybersecurity. Whether you're applying these principles in your personal cybersecurity regime, or you lead or are part of a team responsible for securing a commercial or government network, and the information contained there. The 12 days can be consumed sequentially or simply act as a series or a library where you can pick any of the topics that are of particular interest. Today, in day 2, we discuss strengthening authentication practices. In our last video, we covered cybersecurity foundations, the basics, if you will. And now we'll discuss taking your login security to the next level. As always, your input through the comments is appreciated. I want our viewers and subscribers to have a say in the future content we develop. So please feel free to share your thoughts there. And while you're in the comments area, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your help in growing this channel is genuinely appreciated. So let's do a quick welfare check on our poinsettia. We're recording these 12 segments over a series of weeks, even though we talk about 12 days. So we have to keep an eye on Petra. Yeah, she has a name. And that comes from an artificial intelligence encounter I had. If you'd like to know more about that, let me know down in the comments and I'll share that story in an upcoming video. But for now, here we go with day 2 of the 12 days of cyber. Strengthening authentication practices. Authentication is essentially proving to a system who you are, and that you are, in fact, who you say you are. We enter a user ID. That's who we say we are. A password is the first layer of proving that we are who we say we are. So password policies are implemented by a commercial organization, or you could implement password policies with your family, indicating that it is important for us to use passwords and to have those passwords be strong, be unique, and we'll talk about all those things. But essentially, the password policies are implemented in commercial organizations or in government organizations to put the backing of the organization behind the fact that password implementations that are complex and unique are important. That policy ought to be written, part of a total system security plan, something we'll eventually talk about in some future videos, and then that policy can be enforced. It's one thing to enforce it by saying, make sure you do it. It's another thing to enforce it through technical controls, which is the ideal way, of course. You can also use secure password managers. We talked a little bit about password managers, but basically these allow you to securely store your passwords, your user IDs, and even the URLs of the websites or systems you access. And now you're able to, in a very easy and smooth approach, simply go to a website, go to an application. Password manager ought to recognize where you are, what system you're going into, and present for you and maybe even fill in for you the user ID and password for that particular system. These passwords are locked away securely. Encryption is applied in the device, but also in the area where these passwords are stored. I'm not opposed to cloud systems. In fact, most of them, the one I use, in fact, are cloud-based. But make sure that it's a reputable password manager and that they have a good security policy and a good history of protecting the passwords. Multi-factor authentication. So we're authenticating. We're indicating that who we are. We're trying to document for the system, prove out that we are who we are. Username, who we are. Password says, here's proof that I am who I say I am. Multi-factor says we bring another factor, another type of authentication. For example, You could have biometric, so a fingerprint and a retina scan. Or think about phones that have facial recognition and use facial ID to bring you into a system. That's a different factor, a different type of authentication. Most often when we're talking about multi-factor authentication in personal or commercial applications, we're talking about using some type of a device or application or method to prompt you for information that only you should know and that is only relevant for a very brief period of time. So for example, you go to access your bank prompts you and says, maybe I don't recognize the computer you're on, I haven't authenticated you for a while, any number of reasons, and you're prompted to receive a telephone call where you'll get a code and you'll type that code in on the system, or to receive a text. It's probably the most common method. In businesses, we also see this layered approach, right? So this is just another layer of security in our authentication, but it will take the place of some type of an application. So myself, I use Google Authenticator. I'm not promoting Google as an authenticator, but it is one that is friendly with an awful lot of different systems. I also use conventional methods like text and such, but the Google Authenticator will essentially replace what used to be, if you were in corporate America, I used to walk around in my office, and a number of the guys that worked in the security operations center and the network operations center would wear around their neck this device, and that had a series of numbers that changed regularly. And that's a hardware token. It's an ability to prove you possess it, it's yours. You log into a system and you're prompted for that information, like you might be prompted by a text in a bank, those sorts of things. But it's presented on that hardware token. And you only have a certain time to enter the correct information. For the most part, those guys have disappeared, and they now are replaced by an application. So I mentioned I use Google Authenticator. Others are in Trust that I've used in the past. Microsoft Authenticator. Duo is a very common. Okta is a very common method. But I'm going to do something that will scare a lot of my cybersecurity colleagues. Take a picture here, or let you see inside. Let me switch the camera here. Let you see inside my Google Authenticator. Now notice that everything just turned yellow and has started to flash. And in a minute, boom, all those numbers changed. And you'll see the little circles on the right are counting down. And in a minute, those are going to change again. So basically, I've just shared a lot of the systems that I have access to, but it doesn't matter because that information, those codes, will change by the time this video hits. In fact, they'll change in the next couple of minutes. So imagine that you're in an airport and you're sitting at your gate trying to get some work done, and you have somebody peering over your shoulder surfing you, and they see, oh, I just picked up his ID, and I think I saw what he keyed in for his password, and I'm going to go over here and try to get into that same system. Well, by the time the guy can even open his laptop, that code has changed. So multi-factor authentication, whatever format you use, is a method of layering cybersecurity authentication practices and boosting our overall confidence in determining who you are and who you say you are. Why do we do it? Well, we do it to make sure that the systems are protected, but also in the event there's a breach, that shoulder surfer got your information. If he goes to break into the system and use it, we're going to reduce the ability of information that's out there to be used to access your systems. We're adding, without that extra factor, individuals that have that information that get it off the dark web, wherever. And we'll do a whole series one day on the dark web. They're no longer going to be able to use that information. We've all gotten our messages from the banks or other companies that our information is out there, our passwords are out there. So multi-factor authentication effectively makes that information useless to an individual that's attempting to attack or get into the information that we're protecting. breach reduction is essentially what it's about. Single sign-on takes that the next level. So single sign-on basically allows you to have one login for multiple applications. Now, you'd think that one of the things we don't want to do is have the same password, and that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is through single sign-on, through technical controls, probably less appropriate or less utilized in personal, but in commercial environments, I log into Microsoft on my Microsoft computer or my Microsoft Windows computer, and I fill in my user ID, I fill in my password, I do my multi-factor authentication, and now I'm in. The system may do other checks. Is it physically the machine that I think it should be? Am I on a network that I should be? If I'm not, am I using a secure VPN? Now I can go into other systems, other applications. Say I go into Salesforce if you're in the sales side of the house. I don't have to enter a separate user ID and password. The system will recognize me, use that single login, which has been authenticated through multiple means, and allow me to access the system. Of course, this makes users really happy. They don't have to fight with multiple passwords. And overall, they have a better user experience. But more importantly, we're gaining control. Basically, think about the fact that that user may leave tomorrow. The minute his resignation hits the desk of IT and the date that he's leaving is firmed up, they turn that application off one time. And now all the systems that he could access, he no longer can access. Compare that with 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 systems and having to go in and turn off each one of those. We're human. You might miss one, and it might be an important one. So single sign-on gives us both a better user experience, which we're always looking for in IT and cyber, to not make it a burden, and also gives us additional control. Speaking of control, user access control is now taking the multi-layer approach and drilling one layer deeper. And it applies a concept called least privilege, or, well, we'll stick with least privilege for right now. So that concept says, or that principle says, Jim Mundy is allowed to access a particular system. It's important to his job. He's not allowed to access something different. So, for example, Jim Mundy may be allowed to access Salesforce, but he's not allowed to access a system related to research and development. It's a typical type of application. The importance of least privilege principle in enforcing it is that if we don't, and a user accesses a system, now without some additional controls, a user can move around. We call it lateral movement in the case of a bad actor or a threat actor. They're able to get into a system using a compromised password. Maybe they figure a way to get past multi-factor authentication. They get in, and now they are Jim Mundy as far as the system concerns, and they can start to move. And even though Jim Mundy may have no business getting into a particular application, if we don't apply least privilege principles, then the bad actor can go in and access those systems. The important thing is, again, it reduces the potential impact of breaches. Now, we said before that multi-factor allowed us to reduce the impact of breaches. But what if multi-factor, for whatever means are out there, gets overridden, gets violated? Now, excuse me, now we've got a situation where the lateral movement can happen. Applying least privilege principles. Another method that is commonly used, or term that is used, is role-based access control. In other words, based on your role, you're going to be allowed to do certain things and certain things only. We can take this another level, where not only do we say that Jim Mundy can get into Salesforce and not into research and development, but within Salesforce, Jim Mundy may be only allowed to do certain things, access his own accounts, do certain privileges that are not administrative privileges. So by defining and leveraging these principles of user access control, we're really controlling things from the benefit of the corporation, of protecting the data, protecting the information, and that's what it's really all about, right? So kind of to wrap up here, we talked a lot about authentication. multiple layers of authentication, and strengthened authentication basically gives you stronger security. So next up, day 3, and we'll be talking about firewalls and endpoint security. So I want to wrap up here. I appreciate you watching. Please feel free to share your feedback in the comments below. I do read all the comments, and I consider your feedback important. And I've received a number of great comments already about future content for these videos. These suggestions will be applied as best I can, and I look forward to you seeing some of your own thoughts or some of your own comments turned into content for some future videos. As always at this point, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to consider liking this video. Hopefully you found some value. Subscribe to the channel. That's what helps us grow. And if you're really enthused by the content, you can click the little bell for notifications, and you'll be notified every time we produce a new video. There's a lot happening, and one of the things that may come as soon as we get through the 12 days of cyber is a news update. I have a concept of a weekly news update, maybe a Friday news update, just talking about things that are happening. And it's important to point out, not just in cybersecurity, that's what you're hearing a lot about during the 12 days of cyber, but this channel is intended to talk to technologies that are used commercially in various organizations, but also personally. So we'll be broadening out, but a weekly news update, I think, would have value. Let me know what you think down in the comments. But until then, thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.